And we welcome you to a very unusual OMERACT session. You know, so what do? We sit around, we talk, we create this stuff called a COS, core outcome set. We believe that that's the target of what OMERACT should be doing and developing. You all work so hard in doing this, thinking about it, and what happens to it after that? Who reads it? Other than another, academic sitting around thinking about this stuff. But does it ever get implemented? And we've had 2 previous sessions on knowledge transfer. And, the results did not knock our socks off. The reality is that of all the work that's been done by OMERACT, and you saw the list of working groups yesterday at our opening session, there are a lot of things going on. But does it get translated to actually anything that's a utility? So we showed you a slide of the uptake of the ACR 2050 and 70, and that clearly has been successful. But what about the other 42 working groups? And how do we actually address this? And of course, we think these are really important. This is what we do with our lives. But does anybody else think that these are important? And who are these other people that have to think that they're important? So this guy over here, Sean Tunis, came up with this idea, and he's worked with us about this knowledge transfer stuff for quite some time. And the reality is that we have to do something different to get people to think about what's happening with this. And the reality is, when you're working on a core outcome set and when you're done, you're not done. You need to then get people to listen to you to actually begin to adopt its use. There is a purpose for them. And so what we came up with is an exercise which could be incredibly entertaining. I think it will be, but who am I? And the reality is we have the people who are the target of these COSs, and there are people from, payers and HTA and government and blah, blah, blah. And, these are the important people to be able to adopt this stuff and to put it to work. And there is a reason to have it. So we wanted to have something that was interactive, that would be interesting, that might catch your attention. And, one of the ways that television caught your attention is they developed a game or a TV show or whatever you want to call it, called the dating game. And we came... listen, who in this room remembers the dating game? Raise your hand. Actually, it's not bad, half of the people. That's pretty good. I'm really impressed. So we're going to play the dating game, and we're going to have matchups, hopefully, where people are going to present stuff based on what they do, and people are going to listen and perhaps make a match on something that may be very important. So that's what this is all about. And I'm going to turn this over to your MC, Sean Tunis, who's going to run our OMERACT dating game.
Welcome, everyone, to the OMERACT dating game. Thank you for showing up today. Do we have the appropriate music for our introduction? All right, well, I hope everyone's in the mood for the OMERACT dating game. Welcome, thank you for coming today. So today we are going to try to find the best match, or maybe matches, for our core outcome sets. We have a core outcome set, a lovely core outcome set is going to join us this morning, and 6 or 7 eligible stakeholders. So core outcome sets aren't happy being all alone. They're happiest when they're used in trials. And we're hoping to find what will make them a good match for our stakeholders. They want to understand, what is it about a core outcome set that's most likely to get the stakeholders' attention, and what are some of the big turnoffs? So what are the things you have in common with the stakeholders? What's going to make a good match? Now, I know most of you out there these days, turn to the apps for your dating needs. Tinder, Bumble, eHarmony, some of you Grindr, okay, Cupid, but today we're going to play the dating game just like they did on TV in the 60s and the 70s. You know, for those of you who haven't followed this closely, there were over 2,000 dates matched on television in those decades. Over the years, many famous people have used this for their love connection, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, Burt Reynolds, John Ritter, Suzanne Summers, and of course, Farrah Fawcett on the dating game, found a match. Now, of all those 2,000, only 20 couples went on to get married. We're hoping to beat those odds this morning. So anyway, good luck, and we're ready to play the dating game and find out who of our stakeholders will be a good match for our OMERACT core outcome set. So first up, it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's core outcome set, looking for a match, and he's eager to meet our stakeholders. Please, let's have a big round of applause for our core outcome set.
Thank you, Sean. My name is OMERACT Core Outcome Set, but you can call me COS for short. OMERACT started in 1992 with the purpose of trying to end the disparities of endpoints between the trials in Europe and North America. So they met to do that, and they finally decided to look for agreement to develop a core set for rheumatoid arthritis control trials. Up to this point, and since then, OMERACT has been refining the process of how to reach consensus to decide on what we need to measure, what we call domains, and how we measure it, the instruments. And as we heard all these days, we have more than 40 working groups working to develop our core outcome sets all around rheumatology and all around. But Sean, something is really important that you need to know is that we core outcome sets, we are really modern beings. We are firm believers on polyamorous, although generally platonic relationships. No, we really think that when we are all together as a consenting adults, then we can really achieve a lot more things. So in this sense, I hope that many of you are going to be open for this, and really looking forward that we can all work together to get as many trialists as possible to use core outcome sets. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jordi, I think you are our very first dating game contestant who's openly admitted to being polyamorous, but that should be interesting. In this case, I think it makes a lot of sense because I think you're going to find that it will be very difficult to choose amongst these stakeholders. So now it's time to meet our extremely eligible and somewhat optimistic stakeholders. Now, these, let's everyone come up on stage and let's give them a big round of applause. Okay, all right, that's good, thank you. So the first and most important thing to know about all of these stakeholders is that none of them backed out once we explained to them it wasn't going to be just a presentation and discussion. So thank you all for being willing to engage in this interesting enterprise. Okay, so first up, we have Grayson, who's representing our patient research partner stakeholder group. Grayson, come on up and please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Grayson Schultz. I am representing the PRP stakeholder group today. A patient research partner is a person with lived experience of a specific health condition or illness who collaborates with researchers as an equal partner in the research process. They also help in developing core outcome sets. Patient research partners are based on the principles of co-production, which emphasize the importance of involving patients and other stakeholders as active partners in all aspects of the research process. This approach recognizes that patients have valuable direct knowledge, insights, and expertise that can help to shape research questions, design interventions, prioritize outcomes, and interpret results. Patient research partnerships are important ways to ensure that research is patient-centered and responsive to the needs and priorities of patients, and ultimately more likely to provide the type of evidence that is essential to improve patients' lives.
All right. Thank you, Grayson. Well, we very much appreciate having you here, Grayson, and it's hard to imagine that we won't find a lot of common interest between you and our onion here. So our next enthusiastic potential partner for the core set is Wim Gutsch. He's representing the HTA, Health Technology Assessment Stakeholder Group, and he's had extensive involvement with the field of HTA across Europe. I know many of you in the audience don't have a lot of familiarity with this HTA community, but I think that you'll find that Wim has a lot going for him, and more importantly, I think Jordy is going to be paying, Koss is going to be paying close attention to what Wim has to say. Please.
Hi there, I'm Wim Goets, and I work for the national HTA body in the Netherlands, and I represent the HTA bodies in Europe. You know that HTA bodies in Europe, but also in Canada and Australia, are responsible for actually advising our government on reimbursement of new technologies like medical devices, pharmaceuticals. And we do that with a process which is evaluation of medical technologies, and we look at safety, effectiveness, value of patients. And we have a lot of expertise, health economics, clinical effectiveness, ethics, and we value really a core outcome sets, because if we want to do these evaluations, we need to have the right data. And we can only have the right data if they're being collected in a very transparent and consistent way over the different types of studies. So therefore, I think I'm really looking forward to meet with our Koss and have more experience to actually have a good relationship with him.
Beautiful. Thank you, Wim. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm guessing that you two will find a lot of common interests. So next up is Vibeke Stranden. Vibeka's been on our show a few times before, and she's back again. So she's going to be representing today our provider stakeholder group. So let's make our provider representative feel very much at home on the show. Thank you.
Well, I think that providers are playing a very important role in the development of core outcome sets by providing our expertise and perspective on the outcomes that matter. And we provide, as experts in the management of treatment of health conditions in question, and we can provide valuable insights on the outcomes that are important to patients, but are also most relevant to us in terms of the disease condition, the interventions that are likely to affect their outcome, and the best ways to measure those outcomes. So it makes sense that we would have this perspective. Essentially, clinical decision-making is very much to the core of core outcome sets, and should be. Although, again, we worry that core outcome sets are for trials and longitudinal observational studies, and not so much for clinical practice. But it is quite useful to take parts of the core outcome sets and consider measuring them in clinical day-to-day practice. So many of the instruments that we use in randomized controlled trials aren't feasible for day-to-day practice, and that is a limitation. But they still provide information that we can find ways to measure in clinical practice, as well as learning from the randomized controlled trials what's important to patients, what's important to outcomes. And I think it's also very important that we as providers try to make sure that these core outcome sets are feasible and they're practical to use, and they actually can be done in a clinical trial setting in an efficient and pragmatic way.
Very good. Thanks, Vibeke. Appreciate it. Imagine at this point our core set is getting extremely excited about the potential matches today, and hopefully this will be Vibeke's last appearance on this show. I mean, because it'll work out. But so anyway, no, I think it's valuable for you to emphasize that the provider's direct engagement with the patients really focuses our attention on what matters most to people with a disease or condition. That's what this is all about, and I think Vibeke really emphasized that in an important way. So next on our list of potential suitors, we have Randall Stevens representing our payers for health research, or our pharma stakeholder group. So Randall, let's see what you could say that will grab our core set attention.
Thanks very much. So the pharmaceutical industry pays for and does extensive research in medical devices and drugs and other therapies. And part of the core domain set, which is really important, is having that core set so that we have the same outcome measures, same methodologies across devices, therapeutics, et cetera. So when you compare in the literature or in the label, you can actually see and compare what the benefit is of each therapeutic for the patient, for the physician, and for the other people here. What's important from our standpoint is that, one, the core set allows us to have a consistent message, consistent methodology. Hold that higher. Not that. Consistent methodology in order to run the clinical trials, and they have to meet regulatory requirements. And those requirements are always fixed from the standpoint of what the regulators want and what we have to perform. Also, from a trialist point of view, if you have a consistent core set, that means that the investigators who are running with you that trial can be trained in the same manner over and over again. So at the end of the day, the core set is really important, as Vibeke was saying, is that it has to be practical, you have to be able to implement it, and you have to consider the impact on the subject in the clinical trials, because if you have too high a burden for those subjects, they leave the clinical trial, and therefore you don't actually get sufficient data to do the analysis. So core sets are really important for everyone, from provider, research, and all the clinicians who work with these drugs day in, day out. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Randall. And certainly, if our COS appreciates a sense of humor, we think that you've made a very good impression. So now we have another potential suitor from the health technology assessment community, very deeply involved in HTA in the United States. Spent 10 years as chief scientific officer at the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, which does value assessment of drugs. He's kind of our Farrah Fawcett of HTA. You could think of him that way. So with that, please welcome Dan Allendorf from our HTA stakeholder group.
Thank you, Sean. I hope you can see the resemblance to Farrah. So I'm Dan Allendorf, representing the US-based HTA stakeholder group. And like WIM, we conduct syntheses of clinical evidence and develop economic models to provide advice to the many payers in the US and health systems about what a reasonable price to pay would be for new drugs and devices and other interventions, taking account, of course, of their short and long-term benefits and risks. Judgments about the value of drugs and other medical products depends heavily on their impact on patient outcomes. And to make comparisons about the effectiveness and value of different treatment options, it helps to have access to trials that measure and report important outcomes using instruments that reflect what patients care about most. So I think that with respect to the other contestants here today, it's really going to be hard to imagine that any of you will find more in common with Corset than me. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Thank you.
All right, we can see the jockeying has begun. Okay, well, I really like your confidence there, Dan. Look, our next potential suitor, very important, is it's Steve Farmer from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It runs the Medicare program in the United States, so actually someone who pays for healthcare services, potentially a critically important and meaningful partner for our cause. Because Steve needs to stay close to home so that our seniors in this country can continue to get health care.
Good morning. I'm Steve Farmer, representing the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and we pay for health care for 70 million Americans, with mostly those over age 65, but also those with disabilities and those with end-stage renal disease who require dialysis. We can play an important role in the development of core outcome sets by emphasizing the importance of meaningful outcomes measured in clinical trials that align with our mission of improving the quality and value of healthcare for Medicare beneficiaries. CMS is committed to promoting patient-centered care that focuses on improved health outcomes, and CMS makes coverage and payment decisions for healthcare services and interventions based on the best available evidence. So CMS also develops and implements clinical quality measures to assess the quality of care provided to our beneficiaries. And to the extent that outcomes used in clinical trials can also reflect the quality of care, core outcome sets can inform measure sets that we use to evaluate the quality of services that our beneficiaries receive as well. Hopefully that will be interesting.
Great, great, great. Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks so much for making the effort to join us. I know you probably couldn't see Steve, but our core set was kind of squirming in his seat with excitement of meeting you. I don't know, maybe it's because the Medicare program spends over $900 billion. I don't know if it's the money that matters, but it's not irrelevant, so we appreciate you being here. Okay, so next and final, I think, potential partner, not final. We have Teresa Mullins from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, our national regulatory body. She's representing the policymakers.
Hi, I'm Teresa Mullen from the FDA Center for Drugs, and I'm going to provide the policymaker, or perhaps the bureaucrat, perspective, and in particular, the regulatory perspective. Now, FDA's mission is to protect and promote public health, but this includes evaluating the safety and effectiveness of new drugs. And although we play a critical role in oversight of drug development, FDA does not develop drugs or conduct clinical trials. But review divisions in FDA, for example, the division of rheumatology or neurology, provide regulatory oversight during drug development, and they make decisions regarding marketing approval of new drugs, and they provide guidance to regulated industry on the clinical and scientific and regulatory matters. And we require that clinical studies for new drugs and biologics are designed to generate the evidence to demonstrate safety and effectiveness. I think regulators play an important role in guiding the development of a core outcome set by providing a clear articulation of our expectations for the reliability and the validity of these measures for the purposes of regulatory decision-making. Now, a primary way we do this is through issuing guidance to industry. So, for example, FDA issued a draft guidance with recommended approaches for selecting, modifying, developing, and validating measurements in clinical trials that evaluate outcomes important to patients. Now, this helps ensure that clinical outcome assessments, or COAs, used during medical product development are going to measure what matters to patients and are clear about what is being measured and appropriately evaluate the effectiveness and the tolerability and the safety of treatments and avoid misleading claims. Now, whether a COA is fit for purpose is determined by the strength of the evidence supporting interpretation of the scores. And do they reflect the concept of interest within the context of use? So a core outcome set that's shown to be valid and reliable for a given concept of interest and a context of use could help ensure that the evidence base for treatments studied using the same measure set for the same concepts and context would be consistent and comparable, and this would make it easier to evaluate. Now, FDA is committed to promoting patient-focused drug development to more systematically incorporate the patient's perspective and preferences to inform drug development. Starting from translational research all the way through clinical development, pre-market review, and post-approval risk management. And over the past decade, we've conducted or engaged, I should say, in over 100 meetings, patient-focused meetings, both FDA-led and patient-led, to hear the patient's perspective and better understand their experience with their disease and with treatments. And this leads to voice of the patient reports, and that can be a helpful reference to FDA, to drug developers, and measurement experts. We've also issued a series of PFDD, patient-focused drug development guidance. And then we recommend that to sponsors and measurement experts when they're trying to develop and select outcomes for clinical trials. Now, I have to warn you, this is going to be my perspective on things as an individual policymaker. In general, I can't speak for all of FDA. Back to you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, that was Teresa Mullins from the FDA, our friendly American bureaucrat. And I could see Jordy's stem wiggling there with excitement. So, sorry, this is a family show, so we're going to keep it. All right. So, last but not least, from the other side of the Atlantic, we have a regulator, Joachim Musaus, and I'm sorry for butchering the name. Joachim from the European Medicines Agency.
Thanks a lot. I'm working for the European Medicines Agency. I wouldn't label myself as a bureaucrat, but this is certainly part of our work. And I'm working for the immunology office there, in charge of the authorization of drugs. For us, core outcome sets are very important because actually we are the gatekeeper for the drugs getting to the market, and we need to say with confidence this drug is effective and it's safe before it reaches the patients. Therefore, our expectations are perceived and are high for core outcome sets, and we need to challenge them in validation. This is what we do at EMA, and it's not the core outcome set alone, but it's also the way how the core outcome is measured, and this means is the right instrument available to have a measurement without bias, is a feasible trial design available to produce and to reproduce the correct results, and is at the end of the day the whole study program based on the outcome sets able to give convincing evidence that the drug is rather effective than unsafe. So this is our part of the evaluation, and here, of course, we look a lot into having core outcome sets harmonized between regulators. This is an important goal here, even so we are under different jurisdictions. But the aim is also to improve clinical research, to facilitate clinical research, to facilitate it for the developers, and at the end of the day, to have quicker and more effective drugs with the best evidence available for patients. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, that is our final stakeholder. As you could see, each of them is eager to connect with our OMERACT core set, and so that's a great position to be in. And just to not forget the premise of this whole thing, it's about finding ways to make our OMERACT costs less lonely. We're trying to find those linkages with the stakeholders that have the potential then to encourage more more involvement of our costs in clinical trials and decision making. So let's have just one more round of applause for all of our suitors, please. Really appreciate their remarks and also their patience and their good humor. And so now we have a few questions to sort of follow-up questions to see if we can make a match.
Indeed, Sean, I'm really excited. This is fantastic. Okay, so I have 3 questions for each of you. So let's start with the first question. So when you are looking for a core outcome set for a serious relationship, what are you looking for?
So that's a really great question. For me, it's really important to see what the patient participation level was like, how involved were patients in every step of the way of developing a core outcome set. Was there the required 20% representation? If there wasn't, why was that? How was the patient input sought? Was there a patient group involved? Was it just 1 or 2 patients? And then what was the process, right, of developing the costs? There's also a more personal assessment that I tend to do, just validating how authentic the patient input feels, right? Did it seem like the patients felt like they were able to share their full selves in developing a cost? Does it seem like they were able to share their full experiences, or were there ways that maybe they were limited in sharing that information? What's most important to me personally is that a core set accurately reflects what's most important to patients, and the way that we have to live with our conditions every day.
In my work, it's critical that we are able to make apples-to-apples comparisons between different treatments available for a particular condition. But even we have to make comparisons between treatments in different indications, because we're interested in value of treatments, in cost effectiveness. So therefore, for instance, we would need data on general quality of life. In the Netherlands, for instance, we are quite active actually in stimulating to take up EQ5D data, because we feel it's important to calculate utilities actually to measure cost effectiveness. Additionally, we are also interested in, for instance, resource use. And I think that for many of you in the room, this is probably not something you would think as part of a core outcome set, but we believe it's possible to actually collect resource use data. It will be also very relevant to actually see what is the value of one technology compared to another technology in a different type of disease. So I hope that with you, I can actually work on that very closely.
Well, I'm looking for a core outcome set to help me explain to my patients what they can expect with each treatment. If all randomized controlled trials examining treatments and outcomes in the same way, it's much easier to compare and contrast and choose between the treatments. It is, however, important that they cover all the dimensions of the disease as it affects a patient. And patients need to see the full complexity of the disease reflected in the outcomes that are shown to them. It's particularly useful when there's a good alignment between the tools that are used in clinical research and those used in practice. And they don't need to be identical, but they should be close enough that when I look at the results of a trial and clinical research, I can then see how they will translate to the patient in front of me. And they're consistent with the ways that I monitor the progress of the patient with that disease.
So for me, first of all, the core outcome set has to be sensitive. And that means that it has to be able to detect a difference between treatment arms and be able to be consistent with that evaluation. Furthermore, it's really important that the outcome measure be polyglottal. What does that mean? That means that if the outcome measure is validated and also available in multiple languages, because I do work across countries and regions, that means I can gather a much wider population in appropriate countries in order to be able to provide information for the EMA, the FDA, and other health authorities. Furthermore, it has to help me convince the regulators, the patients, and the physicians, and of course the payers, that the risk-benefit ratio for that therapy is appropriate for the patient, the type of disease they have, and how much the drug is effective versus the safety profile. So those are my three important things from my perspective.
So like Wim, although I hesitate to agree with him because I still think I'm a better match. Our economic models for value assessment are always designed to compare different treatment options, and we often need to combine results from different studies of these alternative treatments. This becomes very difficult to do when the studies report different outcomes using different instruments, or even measure the same outcomes but in slightly different ways. We have no way of knowing how those different ways to measure outcomes are related to one another. To build on what Wim said, it becomes an apples and oranges comparison problem. So most importantly, we want to see that a cost is recognized and accepted by clinicians and patients and trialists. And after that, it's really important that outcomes are measured in a standardized way to the greatest extent possible. It's way more helpful than just having an agreed-upon set of domains. The instruments that inform these domains are critical, and we would love to have outcomes measured at similar points in time as well. Our models have a hard time dealing with outcomes that are reported by some at 3 months and others at 6 months, for example.
I think Steve Farmer's next.
It seems like Dan, Wim, and I all have very similar tastes in measure sets. It makes sense since we have similar jobs and that we look for treatments that work best and whether the outcomes are meaningful to our patients. The Medicare program has a lot of rules, that we have to follow in our decision-making process, and it makes it difficult for us to endorse any single core outcome set that we do not create on our own. So we look to the published literature when identifying preferred outcomes that inform Medicare coverage decisions. When we conduct national coverage analyses, all of our decisions are made in an open and transparent way with multiple opportunities for public comment. It helps if you can show us that professional societies and other key stakeholders support and endorse a specific outcome measure or a core set and specific critical outcomes among all the others. So ultimately, you need to show me the evidence supporting your core outcome set so I can defend my decision-making in the public domain.
Thanks, Steve. We have Teresa up.
Well, the whole idea of relationships, I don't know, as a regulator, I think we're sort of independent and kind of judgmental. So with that aside, as a regulator of drugs, the FDA cares a lot about making new treatments available that provide a meaningful clinical benefit and they're safe to use. So under US law, FDA must determine that a drug is safe and effective for use under the conditions prescribed or recommended or suggested in the labeling. The demonstration of effectiveness under this standard requires that we have substantial evidence that the drug will have the effect it purports or is represented to have. Now, because all drugs have adverse effects, the demonstration of safety requires showing that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. And if it's a methodologically sound, fit-for-purpose collection tool is used to collect patient experience data in the development program, well, that collected data can provide a direct evidence regarding the benefits and the risks of the drug and the importance to patients. So it's important, an important thing that I would look for, particularly with clinical outcome assessments or COAs in a core outcome set, would be that it can be considered fit for purpose for a given concept of interest and concept of use. So the concept of interest is that aspect of the individual's experience or clinical or biological, physical, functional state that the assessment is intended to capture. And the context of use considers things like the use of it in that COA to support the endpoints, How long a period would you use it, for example, the computation over some period like 12 weeks, a target population that you're intending to use it in, the study context, the timing of its use, and the implementation. In other words, where is this information being collected, like in the hospital, in an outpatient clinic, at home, etc.? What kind of instrumentation, paper, digital health, etc. So these are the things you need to be looking at. And as I noted earlier, we'd like to see, we have these things outlined in our recent guidance. Now, starting in 2019, FDA issued some grants to support the development of some standard core sets, but it is a lot of work. Having a standard set that's really readily available and fit for purpose could be very helpful and support both the quality and the efficiency for developers and for reviewers. And what is submitted to FDA for review still has to be evaluated to make sure it is fit for purpose for a given development program and indicate, the indication that's being sought. But the existing set could be a great starting point if it does need to be modified to do a little bit of modification. And that guidance I mentioned before could actually be helpful in looking at whether you can use a set just as it is, or if it needs some modification, or whether you have to actually develop something new.
Yeah, as the regulator, we need to define if the drug works actually, and what is better for an outcome than what is most relevant for the patient, what is most clinically relevant, and what influences most positively the course of the disease. So obviously, the best marker to judge upon is what is most, let's say, impacting for the patient. So this is the major criterion for the regulator. But as said initially, it's not enough. The core outcome should be measurable in a reliable way. So it comes together with the right tool, and best of all, if this tool can be applied everywhere. So this reflects to a feasible trial design. You need an outcome you can actually measure, which doesn't need 10 years or 20 years to deliver a result. So these are the essential criteria, I would say, for core outcome sets, A being the most impacting for the patient and the course of the disease, then being measurable in a reliable and reproducible way, and then being applicable in a feasible trial design.
Thank you. All that is absolutely fascinating. So I have my second question now. What do you need for a core outcome set to fall in love for it? And most importantly, what are your turnoffs?
I think we're going to do Randall first, because I think has to go for a call.
Yeah. So first is consistency, not only within the trial, but across the trial sites and across the trial designs. Also, what's really important is that the core set look at not only the early disease, but also late disease, because where you're going to implement those therapies depends on what the target is and how it's going to affect a patient early in the disease course or late in the disease course. And so I need both, depending on what the therapeutic I'm looking for is.
All right, well, I know Randall has another date to get to, so I don't think we're going to hold that against him.
He's really polyamorous.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, we'll go on to Grayson then next.
Well, for me, one, it helps if a cost is cute. And clearly that checks the box today. I also feel like it needs to be meaningful, right? Other core outcome sets that I've looked at, like, I wonder, does this fit with stuff I already know? Is this stuff that is being duplicated, work that's already been done? Is this kind of a water is wet situation where the core outcome set really is just saying stuff that patients already know exists? That is a major irk for a lot of patients. It's important to see the added value of what the core outcome set is, how it improves the lives of patients. And for me, life impact is really important. And that can mean a lot of things, right? That could be anything from being able to carry on activities of daily living, to being intimate with a partner, to starting a family, to being able to manage kids, right? All of that really matters. Some might see some of those things as like a secondary aspect, like, well, you're alive, why do you need to have sex? And, you know, look, a lot of us maybe need that, and that's okay. These aren't just sprinkles on ice cream. This is an important thing for a lot of people. And it's important for us to have access to the things that we want to participate in and the things we want to be, right? So for me, the core outcome set should really help me see how I can achieve the goals that I have in life, but also be generic enough that it can apply to other patients.
Yeah, when I'm looking for a core outcome set, I think I'm looking beyond standardization of trials. I think it was already said by Wiebke. Trials have their core outcome sets and registries have their own, and it makes sometimes difficult to compare. I must admit, when I was younger, I was dating another core outcome set. He was in oncology, I don't say which one. And we had a lot of discussion about using progression-free survival, which was measured in trials using RECIST criteria, but that was not measured in clinical practice. So we had time to treatment failure. So what could we do to actually bring those together? So we think that it should be relevant both in the clinical practice as well in clinical trials. So we need to have a lot of discussions together to really find out the best items in the core outcome set. And I'm looking forward to that. Wink, wink.
Keep it simple while still capturing all the dimensions of the patient experience. When there are too many domains, measuring and comparing between treatments can be very difficult, especially as some may improve while others deteriorate. And that adds complexity to the decision-making process. It's complicated balance, as simplicity is limited when you need to account for multi-system diseases with many aspects, particularly our immunologic diseases. A core outcome set, therefore, needs to provide answers to address both the hopes and the fears of our patients, along with the treatment under consideration.
So for me, it's about standardizing the outcomes. I think that too often organizations that are creating these outcome measures and sets end up adapting them for their own needs. And so Wim gave an example with the RECIST criteria. I've seen situations in which RECIST criteria have been described as standardized, but then they've been tweaked in individual studies to the extent that they're really not comparable with each other. This all defeats the purpose of being standardized. So I look for a core outcome set to provide consistency. So I want you to be predictable and not do crazy things on the outcomes and the tools used to measure them.
So domains are important, but that's not enough for us. In addition to domains, we would like to be able to recommend specific validated instruments, as well as have well-defined minimally clinically important differences. And we also want to know how long those outcomes should be measured for to be relevant. But remember, at the end of the day, for whatever you say, I'm going to keep asking, show me the evidence.
Well, we look for good quality measures and we look for the evidence to support them. I mean, and basically, we're looking for things that are going to reflect what matters most to the patients and if it's measuring it well enough. And a core outcome set has to be able to show this. But if you had a set already, and you know, we're saying fit for purpose, which isn't to say perfect, okay? But what we do ask you to show, if you've got a set that you want to make use of in a development program and you want to talk about it in your application, then there are 8 criteria that we've laid out now for sort of talking about why this is good. Why do you think you're a developer? You're smart. You're a smart person. You've given this a lot of thought. So here's some 8 things for you to considerations for you to try to address when you're submitting something to FDA. What's the reason for the choice of that particular measure set? Well, why is that a good set in terms of assessing the concept of interest? And it can do a good job of that. That all the important aspects of that concept of interest are covered in your chosen measure set. That the respondents understand the instructions and the items and the tasks and measures are intended to measure they're really measuring what you intended to be measured. The scores are not overly influenced by processes or concepts that are not part of the concept of interest. The method of scoring responses to the COA are as appropriate for assessing that concept of interest. It doesn't like you have to write a dissertation about these things, but you have to provide what your rationale is, right? The scores from the COA correspond to the specific health experiences that the patient has related to that concept of interest. They're sufficiently sensitive to reflect clinically meaningful change within patients over time in the concept of interest, in that context of use. And the differences in the scores can be interpreted and communicated clearly in terms of the expected impact on the patient's experience. So if you've got a measure set that you can answer these questions and you provide a rationale, that's what we're looking for. And that's meant to give people some flexibility. It's a practical application. So, but another issue could be, whether measure sets are proprietary. And so this can also limit their use. So we're saying a practical approach here that allows flexibility, and the sponsor can provide the basis. And for example, if a measure set's been used in other contexts or is applied in the same context and concepts are being measured, that can be referenced as, that's part of the basis, you would think, for why you're thinking it's a good application this time. So that's the sort of reasoning we have.
Well, if you fulfill already my basic criteria, which is A, you reflect what is most important for the patient, B, that you can be measured in a reliable, reproducible way, and C, you can be integrated in a feasible trial design, then I tell you what I need to fall in love. And this is, I would say, standardization, because standardization allows us, amongst regulators, to facilitate drug research and to bring drugs sooner to the market and with reliable trial results. But you shouldn't be too standardized because, of course, different drugs have different effects. So the core outcome set should be wide enough to capture for a drug what the specific effect is for the drug. I guess if you could deliver that, we would be a match.
So before the final question, which I think we have to keep the answers short, I just want to highlight costs that a lot of these stakeholders seem to have expressed a lot of interest in knowing more about your instruments. So you just want to, keep just keep that in mind as we close out the session.
I will keep it in mind. So, last question. Who would you bring to an open polyamorous relationship?
That's such a good question. I'm somebody who loves the idea of kitchen table polyamory, where we all come to the table together and we talk about everybody's needs and try to fulfill all of it, right? And for me, I really need a multidisciplinary representation of all of the people who are involved in caring for me and for my conditions. The more voices in the group, the more likely it is that me as a whole person is taken into account, and the full dimension of my conditions, right? For example, if we're thinking about gaps, I talked to a lot of physical therapy fellows and occupational therapy fellows last night, which was really cool, but I haven't seen any mental health providers here. And as somebody who has been sick since childhood, that's a very integral part of how I fare and how I do well. So bringing in more providers like that so that we're seeing the whole picture would be super awesome.
Yeah, I think patients indeed are an important group to have on board. So Grayson, I think we really can join together with COS. I think it will be a great relationship. But also the clinicians and the other stakeholder groups like regulators, health insurance companies, health technology developers should be on board. In the Netherlands, we have organized for several years now a number of what we call roundtables on disease areas where we have core outcome sets. So we have a program called outcome-based care. And there we already made that kind of discussion and it was really valuable. So I think we can do that together. And it's important also to do this together internationally. So we should do a lot of traveling actually to go to different countries and meet all the stakeholders and have those relationships.
The patient experience is essential in making core outcome sets meaningful, but we need to have the payers. If not, we won't be able to provide the treatments. And organizations that provide guidelines have a say, but a much different level. So it's critical to the use of core outcome sets to include the organizations who are doing the primary research, and there are often many of them. As there frequently are several groups working in the same area, we need to include as many as we're able.
So in English, we have a phrase, the more the merrier. So I don't know that I need to be polyamorous myself, but it really won't harm if others are on board. And so as an example, really in any HTA environment, there has to be outreach to patients, to clinicians, to health systems, to understand in the evidence what is being measured and what is not, and how important those gaps are.
Well, again, as a regulator, I mean, I'm not really having relationships as you sort of described. I mean, I'm independent. I'm judgmental. I'm really not looking for this kind of, as a relationship as such. I'm in assessment mode most of the time. And so, we've outlined criteria that we would recommend sponsors use to meet those expectations, guidance. And it's certainly possible that more than one measure set could meet the recommendations that we've laid out there. But it could help create greater efficiencies in our drug development ecosystem and even in the healthcare system if we were able to work with a measure set that was a core outcome set, a standard set that was fit for purpose and could serve the needs that I've described. I mean, that could just reduce duplication, and it could be helpful if it meets the need.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, CMS conducts its work in an open and transparent way with extensive public input to all of our decisions. And as such, we really can't be in an exclusive relationship with a single entity. Public policy is most impactful when we are able to build consensus across a diversity of perspectives. So our review process works best when we're able to find alignment with the FDA, the NIH, professional societies, patient groups, and others in the public.
Well, nothing works without patients. That's the whole point of the exercise. But similarly, nothing will work without the clinicians' input. We need their expertise in how to evaluate and how to measure the outcome sets correctly. But as far as we get with that, then we need industry to apply the outcome sets to provide data for validation and finally develop the drug. And then going one step further, we have the HTAs, we have the payers, and they rely on our work to have a proper benefit risk assessment. Then they can, in continuity, then without duplicating any unnecessary work, quickly come to a conclusion to pay for the drug and finalize their assessment. So there's nothing in isolation here. We need it to do all together. So,
Cost, any final words? We know you have a lot to think about here, and we'll allow you some time during the breakout session to think this over. But I think these stakeholders are going to be testing even the limits of your polyamorous inclinations. So Well done, and let's give a big a round of appreciative applause for our stakeholders.
And discuss, because one of the key issues in each breakout room is how you are going to actually think about transferring this knowledge so that you can inform others, tweeting it, LinkedIn. And you went off into those breakout sessions and you did stuff. Well, you were supposed to actually be prepared now to come back and demonstrate what each of you prepared. And there were 5 breakout groups. Is that right, Shauna? 5? More, 6. 6 breakout groups. So we're going to call you up one by one, but unfortunately, we only know them by the number of the breakout group. So breakout group 1, are you ready to come up?
I'm talking in the name of the group, so we discussed a lot about this. And, well, we are pleased that we had the opportunity to think about it. We are sure that being on social media is amazing, but some thoughts that we had that we would like also to discuss is that it's our brand, so it's not fair that we go to social media without all the professionalism that we have when we research the core outcomes, all research we do. So it's important to get to social media strong and with the values that reflect all the work everyone here does. So the suggestion would be that the message would be more well structured and targeted if we had intentionality and if we divided the audience into different stakeholders. I was remembering there is a speech about Dr. Steve Pinker from Harvard, and he says about that, miscommunication is too easy. So it's really important that we are very, very intentional and careful with the words we select, with the core outcomes of the message we want to pass in our posts. And I think it applies to all social media platforms. And sometimes also the platform selects the audience. For example, in some countries there is too much, I don't know if prejudice or preference for some platforms. I see, for example, I come from Brazil. In Brazil, people love Instagram, and they do commerce on Instagram, and they use it for everything, including research institutes. But in North America, I know scientists prefer Twitter to express opinion, for example. So maybe it's worth it to do a study on this topic to understand which would be the best platforms we should focus on and how to approach them. And we would suggest some professionalism. We can be trained for that, but maybe we should think ahead, as our group suggested, maybe a SIG to learn and brainstorm what we should do and how to approach social media. And of course, the most popular platforms, they surely are great ways to promote our research to patients and also the outcome sets, and even to get feedback from them. But when we are targeting research groups and other stakeholders like policymakers, definitely we want to go to this conversation with a posture that shows we are responsible with what we are doing. And that's why we probably would suggest focusing on editorial of key journals and also sessions that we can speak to professionals directly. So the big problem is if we think we are targeting everyone, we are targeting no one the right way. But Caitlin, the voice of OMERACT in our group, she made a miracle. She could make a video that basically speaks to all audiences in a simple way, very informative. It's a draft, but it's amazing. You see.
Every day, countless decisions are made about how to treat rheumatic conditions. These decisions are based on how well each treatment works, and we measure this using tools called outcome measures. Outcome measures matter to everyone. They matter to patients and their families when deciding what treatments to try. They matter to clinicians when deciding which treatments to offer and when monitoring how well they are working for their patients. They matter to regulatory bodies when deciding which treatments to approve. And they matter to payers when deciding which treatments to fund. Researchers also use outcome measures in trials to create the evidence about whether treatments work. There are countless outcomes that are being measured and countless tools being used to measure them, but it makes much more sense for all of us to be using the same ones. So we're comparing apples to apples. This helps everyone because using standardized, trustworthy tools means we can be sure we are collecting the important information that guides treatment, and we can easily compare how well treatments work compared to one another. This is where OMERACT's core outcome sets change the game. OMERACT is a collaborative, volunteer-driven, international organisation that develops core outcome sets for different rheumatic conditions that are trustworthy, evidence-based, and are truly collaboratively developed with all stakeholders, including patients, clinicians, researchers, funders, policymakers, and regulators. This means you can be sure that our core outcome sets are measuring what really matters and using tools that are proven to be trustworthy. OMERACT has over 40 working groups developing core outcome sets for use in clinical trials, in clinical practice, and in regulatory and funding assessment. If people all around the globe start using OMERACT core outcome sets, we will streamline our research and practice to avoid research waste, improve decision making, and ultimately improve the lives of people living with rheumatic conditions. Visit our website to see if there is a core outcome set that you can use.
Hello everybody, I'm Max and I'm reporting back from breakout session number 2, and we focused on Twitter. At first, some themes and main points we have discussed in our breakout session. we asked ourselves 3 questions. The first one, why use Twitter? At first, you would have to create an audience of followers, and you would later be able to use that audience to create awareness in our context for core outcome sets. Later on, you would be able to share more specific content with these followers, and in case you want specifically champion or advocate for the uptake of core outcome sets, you could try to use a call of action. Then we asked ourselves whom we should target using Twitter. And we concluded that we have to decide whether it would be a wider audience or a targeted audience. And we decided that in that regard, a tweet would serve just as a hook, because most of us, I think, are aware that there are only like 280 characters you can use in tweets. And so that would not be enough. You could have a very interesting, a funny, a catchy message that would then provide a link to a web page, a video, giving you more details, more relevant and detailed information. And finally, the last question we wanted to have answered, how to target using Twitter. And with every media, I think you have to tailor the message to the audience, but there is a very specific concept to Twitter. In every media, you should regard your content, format, terminology to tailor the message to whom you want to target. But with Twitter, you have that very specific concept of hashtags. And we discussed about how using specific hashtags will target a specific audience. Later in our session, we also had the possibility to collect and vote on some example tweets, and to make it more easily imaginable for every one of us, we tried to already put them in a OMERACT design, but these are not actual tweets yet. Maybe they're still to come. The one that got the most votes was it takes all stakeholders to work together to champion the core outcome sets. Learn more at omeract.org. We had a discussion in our working group whether we should replace stakeholders with some more specific terms, patients, providers, industry representatives, and others, because stakeholders might, in that context, be too inside of a term for maybe people not that familiar with OMERACT. Then we had 2 very interesting tweets going on about onions. Clinical trials in rheumatology that don't use core outcome sets make me cry. Learn about the OMERACT onion. And another one, OMERACT onions don't make you cry, clinical trials done better. Obviously, again, connecting onions and OMERACT is very much of an insider, so you would have provide additional information later or even before that tweet. And we came up with, I don't know, about 10 tweets that actually got votes, so there are still a few more of them. And in the end, a huge shout out goes to Grayson, who during our session collected some example hashtags we might use in Twitter for OMERACT, and that might also be specific to specific target groups. That's all from us.
Hi, I'm Romy. I'm reporting back for the Facebook group. So the first thing we did, we were tasked with creating a Facebook post that would increase the uptake of the OMERACT core outcome sets. So the first thing we did was look at how many Facebook friends OMERACT currently has. And that's when we knew we had a challenging task ahead. So there were two separate pages, one a general, which had 34 followers, and the second was a separate closed group for OMERACT research partners that had 30 members. We don't know if they're the same or different members. So the first thing we decided as a group, collectively, that from what we knew about the Facebook demographic, we were going to target older patients with arthritis. And our suggestions fell into 3 categories. process about how we were going to do it. The second was a hook or an engaging statement to attract the attention of the audience. And the third was the content of the message. So, not surprisingly, the most common process suggestion was to increase the number of OMERACT Facebook followers. So, right now, can I ask everyone to take out their phones and please like the OMERACT page, Facebook page? I'm sure we could probably double those numbers within a minute. So, an example of a hook was, how do you know your RA is doing well? An example of the content was, core outcome sets help you and your doctor monitor your arthritis. So after we went through the facilitation and the voting process, this is what we came up with. The hook, do you have arthritis? OMERACT brings together people with different interests, including patients, who work together to improve their health and quality of life for patients with all different types of arthritis. We use measurements known as core outcome sets to help you and your healthcare professional monitor your arthritis and how well your treatment is working. And then we said you can learn more about OMERACT patient partner researchers. And we've put that link, but I think after seeing Group 1's YouTube link, that would be much better. So something ideally to promote the uptake of core outcome sets rather than just something about OMERACT in general. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Lara. I'm reporting back from the Instagram breakout group on behalf of my fellow reporters, Rachel and Deedham. So our group had some great discussions about what we could do with an OMERACT Instagram account. If you're not already familiar with Instagram, typically you post photos or short videos with a short amount of text and some hashtags. We thought about who uses Instagram. We thought possibly a younger age group, but definitely patients, clinicians and researchers could all have Instagram accounts. I also checked the EULAR Instagram account as an example, and they've got 4,000 followers. In our breakout group, we agreed that an OMERACT Instagram post should be fun and it should be used as clickbait to draw people in and then send them elsewhere for a more serious message. So our group had some great ideas for posts and campaigns, and we've come up with 2 drafts off the back of that as an example of how Instagram can be used to promote a core outcome set. So this is the first one. So in the actual app, you'd see one photo at a time and then swipe right through the photos, but the text at the bottom remains the same. So if we test different treatments for a disease, but everyone is measuring their effectiveness with different tools, then how can we know which treatment works best? We need a hashtag core outcome set. And then that leads you to OMERACT. And the second one, do you know which treatment works best or are you lost? We don't know what treatment works best until we use a core outcome set. So that's Geordie. Sort of like we call him Where's Wally, but like Where's Waldo or whatever he's called in your country. Full credit to Rachel for the Where's Waldo post there.
Hi everyone. So I'm Nathan, I'm reporting for the LinkedIn group.
Speak more into the mic.
Yeah, of course I can speak more into the mic. Okay. I think it was one of the easiest platform maybe, because it's very straightforward. So we did a little poll to see which concept were endorsed with our group, with a very ingenious voting system, as you can see. And we came out with a few highlights. So mainly about the onion and patient implications. LinkedIn, being LinkedIn, we target an audience with a more professional mood, let's say. So industry representative, advocacy group and healthcare providers. You can see a few of the quotes we came with. And finally, Erin just framed all this concept into a prototype that is not yet published, and emphasis on the fact that OMERACT is a place where there is a plurality of profiles, such as patient representative, clinician, industrials, that meet and share ideas together. And that's all for me.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin. I'll be giving the media brief today. Oops. So here are some pictures that really encapsulate the wide breadth of opinions in our group. And it really ranged from talking about defining the cause, to promoting OMERACT, to even saving taxpayers' money. But you're probably asking, what is a media brief? And it's not really a social media, and it's very different from the other kinds of presentations that you sort of saw today. If I ask, how many of you guys have ever read a media brief, you'd probably be in good company that few people have. Here's a very topical example. The UK government giving a media brief on its evacuation from Sudan. This is basically a summary of a white paper. It's a mission statement. It's a broad stance given by the organization itself. It is not aimed at the lay person. It's not aimed at the individual. The idea is it's then taken by groups, by other countries, by the UN, by UNICEF, or by media organizations that then disseminate it into a lay format. So here's BBC News. So what does it look like for us, for a medical healthcare organization? On your left, you will see a template, which is very commonly used in most media briefs. On the right, I've given an example of the Society of Family Planning in conjunction with the FDA. You can see that's probably aimed at societies like the Society of Obstetricians or Gynecologists. And it's actually fairly lengthy, it's wordy, and it can have technical language. So what were our main take-home points? Well, very similar to everyone else. We want to make sure that a cause encapsulates the common struggles that our patients experience. Whatever we measure must be apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here, but research has traditionally been very medically focused, and we have to orientate ourselves back to the patient. Of course, with any kind of media promotion, we want to promote ourselves. What is OMERACT? Who are we? And we want to make sure that all of our other stakeholders hear our name and hear our brand. When stakeholders work together, everybody wins. So I hate to read off slides, but this type of slide probably is kind of a bit different. What is our objective? Our objective is to promote the use of cause in research. That's the whole point of the media brief. A great prompt suggested by someone was, how do we measure our patient's disease? If we ask ourselves that question, hopefully we'll find the answer. OMERACT's mission statement is advocating for the use of core outcome sets to measure healthcare measurements. COS helps create outcomes that matters to patients, making it easier for healthcare professionals to understand what the patients are really experiencing. Who are the audience? Well, I'd suggest things like patient advocacy groups, Creaky Joints, Arthritis Foundation. They can then disseminate it to the individual patients. That, hey, there are organizations like OMERACT that really are trying to listen to your perspective. It's regulatory bodies like the FDA. It's large medical organizations like ACR and EULAR. And of course, it's medical industry, who are often the ones leading the medical research. So our message is that by using COS, we can identify the common struggles that patients face, which can be used to develop more effective research. That means whatever must be measured must be reliable, comparable, and accurately reflect what matters to patients the most. By using an evidence-based, patient-focused cause, OMERACT aims to make sure that researchers and doctors are measuring the right thing for the right patient. Traditionally, healthcare research has had little consideration for the patient's perspective. OMERACT is leading the way to change that by incorporating the patient's perspective in the development of the cause itself. By working together with medical professionals, industry, regulatory bodies, and most importantly, the patients, OMERACT strives to bridge the gap and lead to better healthcare outcomes that are more effective, cost-efficient, and patient-focused. Core outcome sets are core to clinical research. So I took a stab at what it would look like, and this would be placed on something like a website. It would be a link, disseminated by Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, dare I say. But it's hard to encapsulate all of the group's points into one small brief. But we would love to hear your thoughts and questions, and let me know.